This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, the most conservative appeals court in the country, that's the Fifth Circuit, just issued a really concerning ruling. Now, they did concede that the commissioner districts in Galveston County, Texas, did violate the Voting Rights Act, but they're also saying that the Voting Rights Act doesn't apply to what they're calling rainbow coalitions of minority voters, so Black and Latino voters together, for example. And they're asking the entire Fifth Circuit to rehear the case and overturn the court's own precedent here. So, what are the implications of this order?
Yeah, so first, let's be clear about what the Fifth Circuit panel did here, because it's really actually quite extraordinary. The Fifth Circuit panel, the three judges who heard this case, found that Galveston County had violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act because it had discriminated against these Latino and African-American coalitions. Then, having found that, they said, oh, but by the way, we want the entire Fifth Circuit, all of the judges, not just the three of us, all the judges, to reconsider this ruling and overturn us. So literally, they ruled in favor of voting rights, and at the same time said, but we'd really like to be overruled. We think that the precedent that we have followed, which is the existing law in the Fifth Circuit, is wrong. So it's like, they submitted an opinion and then asked to be overruled, which, like, who does that? Well, I'll tell you who does it. The Fifth Circuit does it. And so it's very concerning because presumably the full Fifth Circuit, which is more conservative judges than liberal judges, may now overrule this rule that has been in place in the Fifth Circuit that allows you to meet the Section 2 Voting Rights Act test by looking at coalitions of voters, not just single minority groups.
Well, this strikes me as the obvious question here, but if the point of the Voting Rights Act is to empower minority voters, then why would those minority voters have to be confined to one specific race unto themselves? Like, why wouldn't multiple minority groups be able to exist in a coalition with the understanding that they're all still minorities?
Look, I think you've put your finger on it, right? I mean, the question is, why, having the Fifth Circuit ruled this way, years ago, and said that you can have, when you are drawing or considering minority voting rights under the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, you can consider different minority groups that vote in concert. In other words, if you have voting patterns among Black and Latino voters where they're voting together, and the surrounding white voters are essentially voting opposite of them, you can consider them for purposes of VRA analysis. And what's interesting is that this has served the people of Texas pretty well. Like, this has been an administrable standard that has set out the expectations of how voting rights in Texas happen. And so for the panel here to say, yes, this is the law, and yes, in fact, Galveston County violated the law, but we want this to be reconsidered, is really disappointing.
And why did the panel not just overturn the precedent themselves? Why did they have to rule the way that they did and then request a full hearing from the full Fifth Circuit?
So to their credit, they followed the existing law in the Fifth Circuit. So individual panels of the Fifth Circuit can't overturn prior precedent in the Fifth Circuit.
Okay.
So kudos to these judges. They did, in fact, follow the precedent, which is what they are supposed to do, and they did. It's just unusual that a panel would ask to overturn its own decision and overturn coalition districts, which, like I said, it's not like the Fifth Circuit is plagued by an unworkable standard or a flood in the courts of lawsuits involving coalition districts. These come up around redistricting, which happens every 10 years, and has served the people of Texas pretty well. So it's disappointing that that's what they've asked for, and we'll see what the full Fifth Circuit does.
And do you expect this order by the Fifth Circuit, which, again, as you mentioned, is the most conservative appeals court in the United States, to be appealed to the Supreme Court if they do overturn that precedent? And do you have any idea of how the Supreme Court might rule on this if it does get there?
So look, I think that if the Fifth Circuit upholds coalition districts, in other words, it does not overturn its prior precedent, which, after all, you would hope that courts of appeals don't overturn their prior precedent just willy-nilly. But if they don't, then it's possible that the conservative, Republicans will bring this to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's possible that if they do overturn the precedent, that the plaintiffs will bring this to the U.S. Supreme Court. And one would hope that the U.S. Supreme Court would recognize coalition districts as an important way remedy the ills and the harms caused when minority communities are discriminated against in voting and in redistricting. But, we have a 6-3 Supreme Court, so, you never know.
Now, obviously, this issue here is narrow in that it focuses on the commissioner districts in Galveston County. But are coalition districts going to be an issue that'll have implications for Texas's congressional maps?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are lawsuits pending in Texas. My law firm has one of them. And coalition districts are an issue in that case, obviously, but coalition districts more generally are an issue in a lot of places in the country, but really no place more important than Texas, because you have such a large Hispanic population and you have such a large Black population. So it's particularly important to all kinds of litigation in Texas.
And by the way, for anybody following along, if you want to stay on top of those lawsuits as they continue to progress in Texas, which, as Marc mentioned, his firm is litigating, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. So all of the updates will be included in that outlet. The link is right here on the screen. Marc, the Fifth Circuit also handed down a ruling regarding Louisiana's congressional map. Can you speak on that? And I think we actually have some good news here as opposed to what's happening in Texas.
Yeah. So again, this is a case that my law firm is involved in litigating, but you may recall that when the Supreme Court heard the case out of Alabama, the Allen v. Milligan case, there was a parallel case that we had also won at the trial court, that the state of Louisiana had appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they, thinking that Alabama was going to prevail, the Republicans in Louisiana were telling the Supreme Court, we're just like Alabama. Then Alabama came out against them in favor of us. And then they started saying, we're not at all like Alabama.
Yeah.
So they have been playing a stalling game and efforts to try to prevent the same outcome, which is the creation of a second majority Black district in Alabama. And they brought the case to the Fifth Circuit, thinking that they get the Fifth Circuit to agree with them. Well, the Fifth Circuit said that, in fact, the trial court had been correct in finding a violation of the Voting Rights Act last time, but said, you know what, we're going to fast forward here and give the legislature of the legislature of Louisiana, till the middle of January to either enact a new map that is lawful, or say that they're sticking with their current map. If they're sticking with their current map, then we will have a quick trial before the trial court. Presumably the results, we know what that will be, which is that once again, that map will be struck down, or they can replace it with a new compliant map. So we're waiting to see whether there is a special session called either by the current Democratic governor, John Bel Edwards, or the new incoming Republican governor, and whether the Republicans will do the right thing and just pass a map that is lawful with a second majority Black district, or, like we saw with Alabama, they will do everything they can to insist that their current map is legal, and they will, force the court to impose a court-drawn map.
Yeah, I don't know how much money I would put on the former. Let's just say that. Marc,
Republicans are not good when it comes to complying with the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
Even when they're called out, there's a shame in the fact that Republicans so often pass laws that violate the law. But there is a tragic shame, a indelible shame, that Republicans, when they are called out by the courts, they don't comply with those courts. Instead, they fight them. And part of the reason I created Democracy Docket was so that people don't lose track of these things. People can follow day in, day out about how Republicans are breaking the law and what the courts are doing to correct it.
Is there any other movement on maps that you're keeping an eye on right now?
New York, big hearing today in New York on the congressional maps. You may remember that the New York Independent Redistricting Commission had passed maps last go around. The legislature tinkered with them, and those were struck down by a conservative judge in a rural county in New York. And the case that was heard earlier today was whether the Independent Redistricting Commission, which is supposed to then, under the state law and constitution, submit a second map, whether it now needs to do so. And so hopefully it will. And if that's the case, I expect we will see a new map in time for 2024 and probably see Democrats gain 4 to 6 seats under that new map.
Okay, well, that seems like the perfect place to leave off. So again, for anybody watching right now, if you want to support Marc and his team as he does this extraordinarily necessary work to preserve democracy across the country, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. Again, that free news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.